Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another podcast episode. It's been far too long since we've had one. And this is a bit of a more of a special podcast to be quite honest. Behind the scenes we've been working together, myself and StrathCole, on a united vision to bring forward to the community. And this isn't a governance proposal or anything like that. It's just merely a document we want to share with the community. We want to let people know what we've got planned, and if people want to follow along with this, then cool. If you don't, we totally get it. So without further ado, I have got StrathCole here. Strath, thank you so much for joining us. It's we've been working on this quite a bit recently, and we're very happy to bring it forward. So how are you? How are things? And yeah.
Hey, good evening. Yeah, it has been a while since we have been here in a podcast. So yeah, I'm doing fine so far. Quite busy with everything going on, but I think it was overdue that we sat down, even with sometimes having different opinions and obviously different approaches for some things we do. It's been time that we sit down, discuss back and forth, and come up with something that we both think is a viable way that could be outlined to the community, that simply shows some ideas and plans that could be implemented.
Yeah, definitely. So for a lot of people that might think that it's all rainbows and daisies over here when me and Strath are doing things together, but it's not. We disagree on a lot of stuff, but we always push forward, and we always kind of find this united front and these compromises. It's so important. And myself and Strath, we're both project builders. We've provided a lot to this community, and Strath himself provides so much to this community. It's immense for people that don't understand quite how deep his roots go into this community and what he's given up to be here time and time again. So working both together, we have come up with a compromised sort of roadmap, a plan, an idea, a united vision, whatever you want to call it. We couldn't quite put a nail on what we should call it. So it's just more or less what it is right now. But like I'm saying, we want to share it with you folks. We're going to be putting this up, aren't we, Strafe, on the Commonwealth, likely just in the community section for discussion if people want to comment on it, if they want to add to it, if they want to change things or anything like that.
Yes, it would make sense, because it's, as you said, it's not a proposal. It's just a list of items that we think could be very beneficial for the further proceeding of the chain, and address some of the issues that were mentioned several times in the community and by several people. So it makes really sense to put it up in a discussion section. Yeah, to get more ideas, to maybe even get some criticism of things that might not be feasible or that we missed thinking about. It can always happen. So this is the best way forward.
Yeah, it's never a definite plan, and there's always a good saying to go by, and it's the best laid plans of my cement can be often led astray. That's a very good saying to go by, and not counting your chickens that have not hatched. Now, over time, we've seen different development teams come forward. We've seen different builders. We have seen different paid teams. The one thing we've always lacked is getting down to these real nitty gritty, simple things that really need addressing that could make a big change. Now, something to take note of with this is we have the ability and the competence to see this through. And that's really important when you're suggesting things and putting things forward, that you can actually provide what you're saying you're going to provide. Because time and time again, governance is sort of, quite a lot of the times, it's a bit of a joke, it's a bit of a laugh, and it's never really quite taken as seriously as it should be. But we hope by providing a united vision, people will be able to see the goals, they'll be able to see the plan, they'll be able to see the idea and what we're kind of thinking we could do within a certain time frame, and how we could go about doing it. So like we were saying, we've spent a lot of time on this, haven't we, Strafe? But there's always room for criticism. That's so important for you as a community to have your input, to have your say, because people like us, we care. There may be people that don't care about governance, don't care what the community thinks, but we do. We want to know what you think. So moving forward, Strafe, did you want to go through the first section? I'll do the actual first point, and we'll bounce back and forth.
Yes, I can do. I think one thing I need to highlight first is that many things in here have not been done yet so far. I am aware. So it means there is necessarily L1 involvement in terms of getting information if something is easier to move forward with, especially when it comes to governance proposals, executing contracts, and such things. But I think that is always something that needs to be done in the discussion later and shouldn't just prevent us from putting this up. So that said, you mean I should go with the introduction, right?
Exactly.
Yes. So what we did is putting up a document with several points that it is 8 overall, and it is kind of an invitation to everyone in the community to work together to improve decentralization, to improve trustless handling of paid teams, for example. And it's important to note that everything outlined here is not something that must be implemented. It's all subject to governance. And yeah, we just need to outline that we, as HappyCatty and myself, we could assist with every point in this that is mentioned, but at no charge. That is not something that we put forward to be another paid team, for example. It's just something that we think can be beneficial, and so we wanted to present it.
Yeah, so
So
just
happy.
just to repeat that as well myself, we're not seeking any payments. We're not a paid team. We won't be seeking any payments in the future for any work. We're simply just here to get a job done, if allowed to do that via governance. Back to you, Strafe.
Yeah, I think you can continue with the first item.
Okay, so the first item on this United Vision is enhance payment for development teams, and we've gone back and forth with this, and we've sort of both agreed that it is very one-sided towards development teams. There aren't really any security buffers, and these security buffers push way further outside of the cosmos into the crypto community. It's always about setting not so much an example, but showing people that we are able to regulate ourselves and ensure that we're providing an equal playing field. So in an effort to increase transparency and incentivize project completion, which is so important because we've all seen the issue with parity not actually being there, la da 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 da. So we are proposing the creation and implementation of a paid per milestone mechanism. This is envisioned as a smart contract that effectively harnesses payments and distributes them on a weekly schedule. Upon release, contractors are free to claim the funds from the contract. Further underscoring the importance of decentralized governance, the contract sovereignty resides exclusively with the community's governance, allowing actions such as reallocating funds to the community pool or redacting claim entitlements. A really important part to note with this is this doesn't halt development. It doesn't slow development down. In fact, it doesn't do anything but provide a level of security that we so desperately need. Their funds would never be halted. It would go on just as it is. Instead, they would have to collect it once a week. Okay, this is really good that we would do something like this instead of simply just paying it all out and then hoping for the best, hoping things get completed and everything gets done in time. We would simply have things on a pay per milestone system. I think this is really good, Strafe. Have you got anything to really add about this point?
Yeah, I think it's maybe important to notice that this is not only to put a security measure in place. It is also an idea because many asked for devs being paid after work done, and especially in the crypto space, putting up a spend proposal after the work was done is very difficult because you are working maybe for 4 weeks without knowing if you really will get paid for anything after. So this is something that tries to solve both sides of it with having more confidence in the community by knowing they can, in worst case, halt the funding or return it to the community pool, um, but also for the devs so they can claim the funds on a weekly basis, for example. I mean, all this is subject to discussion if it should not be weekly, but it should be be weekly or whatever. That's something to discuss. It's just an idea how the problem for this payment thing and the multisig that is sometimes used um, could be probably solved.
Yeah. So it's worth noting that, like we've been saying, folks, we have the competence and ability to get these things done if approved via governance. Everything's subject to governance, it's subject to discussion, and it's subject to you folks having your input. Now, Strafe, let's move to point number 2. You can handle this one, and I will take number 3.
I think instead of reading it out, I will summarize it a bit in my own words because it's sometimes easier to explain it than to simply read the words. So, the thing is, we had some discussions in the community about the, in a way, centralized discussion forums for governance. This is not an issue at all when it comes to community discussions. It's just for the governance related things like discussions of proposals or drafts for proposals. And so the idea was to set up a contract on chain that is not owned by anyone and that would serve as a very stripped down discussion forum. So you can post in there with your own wallet. There's no off chain um, part, no database off chain. It's just everything on chain. So it could be incorporated into the station, maybe in a different section in there. So you would be able to just take part in these discussions without registering any account in a forum or a discussion group, Discord, Twitter, whatever. You could use your wallet to take part in that discussion. And when it comes to spam prevention, moderation, it also could be done through the contract. So there could be moderators assigned or wallet bans introduced, and all that hopefully could be done by government governance proposal. So no one would control this contract. It would have no admin, just yeah, just assigned moderators that could at any point be reverted by governance. So, and of course, just to say, this would need to be open source. Of course, there would not be any closed source contract deployed. It would have to be deployed by governance somehow. So there is no entity that has sole control about what happens there.
Yeah, this really levels the playing field, so to speak, and it's not even a situation of someone trying to seize power from one person, put it in another person's hands. This is simply backfeeding everything into the system that we all utilize on a regular basis. This will introduce, I believe, a lot more engagement because people will simply be able to have their say in the app. These transactions, right, Strath, they become immortalized within the chain. They actually become a transaction on the chain at that point, right?
Right, that would be the idea, because we witnessed that sometimes it can happen that you have a quite old proposal that you want to go back to. I think we had that situation with the 800 million ozone treasury, because that proposal isn't accessible by normal means anymore. So you would have to go to the archive Wayback Machine
Yeah.
to find the stored version. And that would be avoided by using on chain storage transactions. In fact, yes.
And then the same with like bad actors who have done bad things, for example, utilizing those third party apps. That would then become immortalized on the chain. The personal information could be removed, but the act itself could be left up to show new people who are joining that, look, hey, this is a route we've walked before. Here's where it happened. Here's their evidence. And, everything would become documented at that point, and no one would ever be able to delete something, remove something. It's all about leveling the playing field.
That's true, but you, of course, also have to have in mind that this is also something that needs to be considered, because no, let's say something publishes information that he shouldn't. You cannot simply remove it. You can remove it, but it might be accessible from earlier block history of the chain. So that would be the thing to consider, but it should be only governance discussions in there. If a wallet does something else, you would have to discuss how that could be treated. Yes.
Exactly, but you run into the exact same problem, right? In reverse, playing devil's advocate here,
Yeah.
going in reverse. You can just do the exact same thing currently with Commonwealth, and look back in the Wayback Machine and other tools that work in a similar nature.
That's true. If they took a snapshot at the, in quotes, wrong point in time, then exactly, then you would have a very difficult time to get that removed.
Agreed. So this is all subject to governance, and it's all subject to people having input. But I honestly believe this is something that should have been done such a long time ago. It's really something that can actually enhance engagement and get the community more involved, because I think a lot of the people you do see commenting on the Commonwealth are the same people over and over again, who are quite deeply involved in discussions. And it's not easy for a lot of people to have loads of different accounts. And if we look at other people like Google, what would Google do? That's how I always think of things currently. Like, what would Google have done? Well, they would have got everything under one spot. They would have got it all under one banner. So it's going to be interesting. It's definitely going to be interesting. So let's move to point 3, which is more or less trying to provide an alternative, cheaper endpoint infrastructure, which is the FCD, LCD, RPC systems. This is always going to be a situation where can we save money to enhance our ecosystem's development, the community's development, anywhere that we need developing. And currently, just with the way things work out, it's the same thing. End of every quarter, there's nothing left in the community pool. So with the existing endpoint infrastructures such as those from Allnodes and Hexagon, the community is likely to be asked for funding 2 systems for the upcoming Q4, and we'll have to decide which ones to adopt for that funding phase. The discussion will most likely include the feasibility of supporting multiple infrastructures. In an effort to simplify the decision-making process, it would be helpful to split the Hexagon proposal into separate spend proposals, focusing on core infrastructure such as LCD and level 2 infrastructures such as wallet software hosting. What I'm going to now do is I'm going to allow Strafe to elaborate on this further and sort of break this down to you in a way that you may understand better.
Okay. So currently, most of the people on chain use the software provided by TFL. That means Station, the quite legacy mobile app, and the Station extension in the browser, be it Chrome or Firefox. So the TFL software uses the public node endpoints, the LCD and FCD mostly, and those are provided by all nodes. Then there is the separate software suite that is Hexagon, Forma, TR, Station Finder, and also the extensions that is using the TR infrastructure with endpoints LCD, FCD, and so on. So what we probably will be facing, that's estimation and anticipation, I would call it, for Q4 would be that we will not only be faced with funding proposals of two infrastructures like Hexagon and all nodes, because I am quite sure that all nodes doesn't have the need to provide everything in hosting the infrastructure for free for all time. And also probably the level one work. And while we witnessed a recent price decrease quite a bit, I'm personally not really sure how much we actually can fund. That will be something that is that's very uncertain at the current point in time, how much funds the CP, the community pool, will have in it, and how much spend proposals will be up at that time.
Yeah,
So
that's actually a huge underlying issue that's not really been brought forward, is the price crushing effect actually on what we're paying out, the ability to be able to keep up with it by subsidizing that with more LUNC coins.
yes,
Strafe,
that's really
currently,
yeah.
just so people know before you go any further, right? All nodes provide everything that we need for our endpoints for free currently, right?
Yes, they provide the public node.com infrastructure. They do it for several chain, I think, in corporations sometimes that are funded by either the chain or entities. But for LUNC, they cover their internal fees for the infrastructure providing themselves currently, but that's something that for sure has to change in the future, because even if many will say, oh, they earn quite a lot of money from validating, from getting the commissions, that is quite true, but that is completely unrelated, because they could be a completely different validator that doesn't provide infrastructure for the chain, just validation as a service, and still get the same amount of commission. So it's, after all, it's still a voluntary service for now that they are offering, and it's quite certain, I think, that they at some point in time have to put up proposals for funding those.
So my understanding of this situation is those endpoints are provided for free, and it's never been mentioned, put to myself personally, that they would stop providing
No.
those endpoints, that we would keep them there. But if we look at it in theory and say to ourselves, well, if we offered all nodes for example, $20,000 paycheck a quarter, that would be half the price of what we are currently paying a quarter. And they would be getting $20,000 more than they were originally getting for running the endpoints for what, a year and almost 4 months, totally cost free to the community. So, when you look at this from a business perspective and you say to yourselves, can we afford this $40,000 cost when we have free infrastructure available? The simple answer realistically is no. If this was a tactics team in a division for a company, they would simply say, no, we need to get rid of that spend. We need to utilize what's free, and we need to develop our ecosystems to build the infrastructure to run this ourselves. Now, we've discussed, haven't we, Strafe, that you could more or less put around 80% of the load across the active set, more targeted towards those big top end nodes in the top 10, something like that, you would always need, wouldn't you, a 20% of that would have to be with someone like All Nodes, a data center, for example.
So I think it was mentioned quite a bit of times that, for example, domain and the DNS management, and also the load balancing, the central load balancing entry points, need to be somewhere at a reliable entity that that controls this one, because that's something that cannot be decentralized. It needs to be a central entry point. Um, but every LCD, for example, that serves the main main chain interactions could be wherever. So let's say we manage to get a central entry point that can have whatever amount of distributed endpoints in it that can just switch between them depending on the load, or a random order or whatever. So that would mean that we have a more reliable, while also a bit slower endpoint system, because it's always, if you have a highly distributed system around the world, you have increasing so-called round trip times. That is the time that the signals take to the recipient and back. And while that is a decrease in speed, I think that wouldn't affect the normal person, because the interactions that normal people do don't rely on fast responding LCD. That is more for projects that have normally also their own LCD to interact with, like marketplaces that need immediately results from the chain when displaying coin prices or movements or something like that. You always should have your own endpoint for that and not utilize the public ones, because it at the same time puts unnecessary load on it, and also is quite slow compared to an exclusive one. So that said, as HCC mentioned, you would have to make it voluntary, but you could ask the big ones to host public endpoints that can be injected into the set of used endpoints, and reduces the need for example, all nodes hosted endpoints, because they take part of the load, and it would solely depend on how many distributed endpoints there can be, how many endpoints still would need to be provided by such a central entity like Terra, Hexagon, or all nodes. There are some things that will not be able to be provided like that. That is, for example, the archive nodes that really host the chain's data down to block one, when everything started. I don't know, it was Columbus 2, 1, whatever. So that is something you cannot distribute. And there are further things like, I think, some API. But this is something that is quite far down the line, because we have really other things currently that will need attention. And so I think that's just a future vision. So for
Oh
now,
yeah, definitely,
so for now,
100%.
the question is just what will happen with the funding. I understand the people that are saying we should have two infrastructures. I'm totally for the concept of having fallbacks, but the issue right now is how we will fund that. And the second thing is, while Hexagon offers the infrastructure, they also offer the infrastructure for the wallet, right? The Hexagon wallet services. So that's something that currently is bundled in the spend proposals. So currently it would be either both or nothing. So the question is if this could be separated. And I think for Q4, anticipating that the price will not jump up by 100%, it will stay in the levels it is currently. And with the quant team also seeking funding, I guess we don't will have the funds available to pay everyone that will put up a spend proposal. So that's something that will need some longer discussion, I think, when it comes to the point.
Yeah, it's a huge issue with the running costs of our blockchain. You really don't see these kind of situations anywhere else realistically than like Ethereum. Ethereum went through a long stage of more or less all of their profit went towards their running costs, and they recently worked out a way to run the infrastructure in a decentralized manner, thus actually moving to proof of stake. Now, the way that I'm perceiving this is that money that would be saved, you could utilize that money to develop the systems to introduce what we just spoke about and decentralizing as much as you can across the active set. What I believe is we have an active set and then we should have the hosting active set, which should be like the top 15 nodes. If anything, with the centralization of power, you could figure out a dynamic way to work that out. But you could handle that as an obligation that is part of your validating role, that if you are to want to enter, for example, that high tier set, then you need to have some of this extra gear to give back to the system. But at the same time, putting this into the system and getting it in to our infrastructure where, for example, right, these central points you were speaking about, if we do save $20,000 a quarter and then eventually we use that money to get that running cost down to, say, I don't know, $5,000, we're only needing those central points for the archive nodes and stuff like that. It's, we've got to spend the time, I believe, as a block. This is my own opinion, of course, as a blockchain to develop our own system so we don't have to rely on infrastructure costs and everything like that, because currently everything now hinges on the price of LUNC returning back upwards and us not having to pay out that much. But currently we're pinned against the wall, so to speak, and we don't have a lot of choices as a blockchain.
What we have to keep in mind, what we always have to keep in mind, when this blockchain started, it was TFL, and TFL owned it. So that means they provided the infrastructure as a company, but everything that has put money into the chain, I mean, not into the community pool, but into the products that they developed, that was income for them. So they paid themselves their infrastructure because it was their chain, and people that wanted to use their chain needed in one way or another contribute to the success of the company. So that's a very different situation than what we are in, because we as a chain, we have no products that get income for the chain in a way that could fund the infrastructure for itself. And that is something I think that smart people somehow need to think of. How can the chain itself, not third party developers, not external entities, how can the chain itself produce DApps or whatever services that makes it necessary to produce income by people paying for it or by people using these services? Because simply doing it by transaction cost will probably for a long while not be enough. to fund everything that we need. And at some point, probably we will need to use the funds available to develop something that it in turn produces income for the chain itself, not
Definitely.
for projects. Yes.
Now, for people wondering, like, how do people do something like this? How do you pioneer in something new? I can stand testament to this. Now, alone, I'm pretty good, but when I work with Strafe, we become a weapon of mass construction. We have overcome so many different hurdles together, building and ushering in completely new systems and new ways to NFT, so to speak. You just need bright-minded people and the time and the want to have these systems created. There's always solutions out there, and yeah, I honestly believe that if we address these bad, not so much bad, but it's like a bucket with loads of holes in it, and the water just keeps draining out all of the time. The price is dumping, things aren't looking quite good, and it's not a lot of people are willing to, for example, put their necks on the line and sort of go, this is a vision. We should do what we can to cut costs, and it's always kind of more, as we're seeing with all of the different proposals. But yeah, let's move forward to the next point on the list, which is number 4, which is enhancing security through on-chain voluntary KYC KYD. Strafe, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you handle this one because you're really good with this side of things.
So it has been brought up several times that developers or entities requesting funds should be doxed or KYC'd, especially doxed to the community, which is something that is very risky for the individuals. So I myself think forced doxing or even forced KYC is something that is not a good sign, not a good signal, because after all, crypto is kind of an anonymous place, protective place regarding privacy, or it should be. So the thing is, if you are funded by the community and the community wants to have some kind of liability or some way to get to a person that has done something very wrong, I would say. So the question is how that would be achieved, and probably that would be achieved through some third-party KYC, so like Certic or whatever options are out there. And because it should not be enforced, the question would be if it wouldn't be a good idea to just make it voluntary, but make a list inside the station with the aliases of the developers or entities or teams funded by the community pool, and just mention if they are KYC'd or not. So that would mean the community can simply decide, okay, we have a KYC person, we have no KYC, and simply can have a kind of decision making helper with this information. And also that this, if this would be implemented, it would be a good place probably to have it in station, just so you, when you look at the proposals, you have a separate section and can see who is currently funded by the chain, who is currently working for the chain, and the KYC status. And if the developers or entities don't want to, that's fine. That's not an enforced process at all. Just the community then can decide if they want to prefer, for example, a KYC team if there are competing spend proposals over a non-KYC, or if they don't care. So it's just something, that might help with decision-making processes.
Yeah, and it arrives on diplomatic terms. It's not forced, and the community has a right to see who's being paid on chain to work on chain. Now, this KYC KYD status integrated into Station is another layer of security and an optional security. But if you think about it and you theorize it, their information would never become public unless they became a bad actor, so to speak, and had malicious intent and then performed that malicious intent. Even then, their information would be released to, for example, someone like Interpol. It would not be released publicly to the community. It does not work like that. Now, the way that this would work is through GitHub. It would be backfed into the chain, right, Strath?
Yeah, it would be like the assets that currently are also managed through GitHub, like, for example, the token list or the different assets that are used inside of Station. They are all held in the GitHub. And if you want to change something, you make a pull request, and the maintainer then can merge it into the system, and then it's displayed. And that would be a viable way, I think, to manage such a list.
And then once again, it's completely optional for these developers if they wish to get a KYC tick against their names. And of course, once again, we are backfeeding it all through governance, which is so important to not try to, create some sort of terror guard or try capitalize on it. It's simply the community putting forward a system which is going to make us look really good from the outside. If I was a company and I was looking to invest in a blockchain and I see this blockchain and I see, for example, there's people like Superman, Bilbo Baggins, you've got, LUNCburn Army. It's not going to sound good when you go to Interpol. The chain's been completely rugged for everything out of the OC pool because someone forked it off or something crazy like that. And you're explaining to them, right, mate, what it is, yeah. There's this guy called Superman, and he was friends with another guy called LUNCburn Army. And you're never going to guess this, right? Bilbo Baggins comes on. They're going to be laughing at us. It's not, it's not forced. So, there's no real reason for anybody to be against something like this being put forward. It can only realistically have positive effects. There couldn't be any negative effects from it. It's completely optional.
Yeah, I think it's just something to provide an option to. It's like having, for example, if you go on X, formerly Twitter, and want to have the blue tick, you need a verified phone number. That is a very low security standard, but you have also to pay for it. So many people just want to have that blue tick. And so it might be that people that work on chain might want to have the tick, and they might include even the certification inside the spend proposal if they think the community is willing to pay for it to have KYC'd people in the team. So it's voluntary, the developers or teams, because some teams that are funded are not necessarily developers thinking of the quant team. I think there are devs, but also non-devs. So yeah, in fact, it would be something that hopefully people would try to get a kind of KYC tick besides the names. But even if not, it is, I think, beneficial to have a list for everyone visible who currently is working on the chain in which team, because I think there's still lots of community members that don't follow everything that's going on and just are visiting Station now and then. And I think a list with all the teams that is maintained through GitHub would be beneficial, no matter if anyone has a KYC tick on it or not, but it would be beneficial, I think.
So for people wondering how hard it would be to add or remove someone from that KYC system, as having a tick or not having a tick. It really is as simple as what me and Strath just went through, where we put a pull request up, right, to get listed on Trust Wallet. We paid the pull request fee, and that was completed around 24 hours later, let's say, right?
Yeah, I think.
It comes down to stuff that's really as simple as that. It's not complex stuff. It's real simple stuff. We can start to add what I'm visualizing in my head as a 4-layer security system, and we'll be getting onto different layers of security later. But I think this is a really interesting point. I myself, right, if there was a option to KYC, KYD, I was being paid by the chain, that would be the first thing I would do. I would KYC myself. I know my information would never become public because I would never do anything wrong. So why would I need to worry, right? Right, exactly. So number 5, Strafe, this one is probably one of the most, I wouldn't even say ambitious points. It's not ambitious is to say you don't know if you're going to be able to do this. We know we can introduce a system like this if approved by governance and put forward. We could cultivate this down into a system which would bring decentralization in a very, very calm manner. So once again, I'm gonna hand this over to Strafe again, because he's realistically the mastermind behind how this dynamic commission would work out for validators.
I think this all goes back to last year when all this discussion started about how the limitations or um, incentivizing for decentralization in voting power started. And there was one thing brought up on Twitter by Sephiroth that proposed a kind of dynamic minimum commission that is implemented. So, like, for example, minimum commission equals voting power. So that would be a very minimal solution of that. Currently, we have a quite big issue, even bigger than we had before, because before we introduced the 5% minimum commission, we had, I think, a Nakamoto of 6. And for all those who don't know what the Nakamoto index is, it means how many validators are needed to, in fact, block decisions on chain or to, to prevent the chain from proceeding. Because that would mean having more than 1/3 of the voting power combined. And currently we are at 4. The top 4 validators have more than 33.3% in voting power. And previously it was at 6, I think. Still bad, but not as bad as it is now.
And just explain to them why it's worse now.
It's difficult. Why? It's easy to blame the change in minimum commission, but in fact,
No, it runs deeper than that. It's the drop off of all of the new guard. The remaining of those who can withstand the punishments of price drops and running costs.
That's also, but you have to keep in mind. Let's say we have 120 validators, and currently around 110 or 113 of them are at 5%. So you have absolutely no reason to look for one of the lower validators, because you go to those who have already high voting power, because for whatever reason people think they provide the better service, because mankind is kind of animals that always follow the herd. So it's people gather around. So if you have high voting power, you will probably attract more people because they see you provide some kind of good service, no matter if you do or not. So even though I am totally against those 0% commissions for the higher power validators, I think it is a valid method for very low ones to get some, to attract some people, like in marketing aspect. So the question is, how can we benefit smaller validators while not apply that same benefit to the higher validators that already have high voting power? And that is not achieved by the 5% minimum commission. That's because it is affecting everyone. So the question is if there is a possibility, and of course there is a possibility. It's just a question of how hard it is to implement on the level 1. But there's always a solution. You just have to check how costly and how difficult it is to achieve. So the dynamic commission system would be an idea to tie the minimum commission to the validator's voting power, but not in a way that is that is just linear. It's quite a bit of exponential. So, for example, if you are below 1% voting power, you could decide yourself. You could set 0%, whatever you want. But when you rise up in voting power, it would grow higher and higher. So, for example, if you achieve a 4% voting power, you would already have to have a minimum commission of 7%. And if you reach 10% voting power or 12%, you would have to raise the minimum commission to 20%. And that would probably be something that could help decentralization, because it benefits the low voting power validators, but at the same time doesn't benefit those with high voting power. And there's no guarantee, but I think it is something that can really work.
Oh, my mic feed dropped out. I've got to sort out this auto mute thing. It's really irritating. Yeah, so, bringing something like this forward it's not going to be pretty. And there could be validators that simply just say no to keep their bulk VP. But, it's a serious issue. The majority of the time, we need them to vote, because if you take that 120 in the active set, you really take that down to an 50-50. That's what we've got voting normally out of that 120 is around 50%. We need those big vote nodes to vote each time, and it's just nothing's balancing itself out. But if you look at Luna, which is an identical chain to ours, it's very balanced over there. Things haven't got out of control, and they have addressed things like that over their times before. You can go back and look where they've had to address the voting power situations and change the staking thing to not just show the top node each time, but to show different nodes, kind of how Trust Wallet rotates the default node that's shown. But it's a big issue. It's a real big point of failure, and we have the knowledge, we have the know-how, we have the ability, and we have the competence to bring this forward. And once again, folks, there's probably people sat there straight going, yeah, they're going to want a paycheck. They're going to want a paycheck. We don't want a paycheck. What we want to see is this chain flourish, don't we, Strath?
Yeah, of course, because I make no secret of it. I have some good amount of LUNC. I haven't sold it, and I would like to see it way up. But that also means,
I mean, everything we've done, Strafe, all of the systems created, the innovative ways we've come up with to do our projects and what we're building project wise, we're not just people that sit and moan or, and don't provide results. We're building on the blockchain. I have a very substantial treasury, which it belongs to the LUNC Penguins community and those NFT holders. And, we're building for a better tomorrow. I don't want to see, all of the things that we've built collapse under the weight of this blockchain not being able to align itself. And it's quite obvious, isn't it, Strath? These top nodes, they're not quite interested, I think is a good way to put it.
I think it is a bit more complicated because I think many of them, yeah, don't really follow everything that is going on and don't sometimes don't even have an idea of what a proposal is about, and maybe don't even have the time or interest to dig that deep into it. But that only becomes an issue when it applies to the votes you need to reach quorum or to make yeah, decentralized decisions on governance.
Yeah.
If this would only affect, let's say we would have a perfect decentralized voting power system with 130 nodes, each at, I don't know, I think it's zero point 0.7 whatever voting power each, then it wouldn't matter. Because if 50% of that voting power set would vote, then we would have a decision every time, each and every time. If 50% now vote on decisions, it depends on which validators vote and which don't, because it's, yeah, I think the upper 10 would reach quorum on their own, at least. Might
Yeah.
even be less, maybe top 4 or top 5. So I think even if this number 5, so the decentralized, the dynamic minimum commission, would require, because I'm no level 1 dev, neither is Jay, and so this would require the level 1 team to develop it. It would be, from me personally, I don't know what you think, would be the first proposal that I would like to see
Yeah.
put up
It's
on
yeah.
Commonwealth.
100%. No arguments here. I think that is the first point to address is number 5. That's definitely the first one. Now, I think the issue you're going to have with this is the either the L1 team say they're not competent enough, they don't have the time, or they simply don't obey governance. Right? This is an underlying issue we can't ignore. That governance isn't law, right? According to certain people who I'm not going to name.
It's not really an issue in this place, because that is something I think the 5% minimum commission was implemented, so this could be somehow implemented in a similar way. It is not something that is that easy, because the 5% commission was, yeah, simply like an enforced session on setting on chain, and the dynamic thing would be needed to hook into some kind of module. I don't know which one, but yeah, it would need to be built in to take effect, for example, each epoch or whatever time span. I don't think it would be viable to do it each block, but that is something that L1 would need to decide. I think we will see a good sentiment on that if it is put up on Commonwealth for discussion. Maybe some people come up with the argument that the 5% minimum commission was only recently introduced. I get that, but I think it is not
Some
something that tries to remove the minimum commission again. It's just something that tries to improve the way that this approach didn't take into account.
Yeah, it's like a replacement for the minimum 5%
Yeah.
commission that actually introduces a system that, for example, right, if you're a tiny little node, you've just started, you're really struggling to get voting power, this module would introduce a system that goes, hey, look at this little validator, he's really struggling. Okay, let's put his commission down. And it would be a fair and equal system that's agreed on consensus through governance. Now, Strafe, I have got the chart that we got together and we sort of discussed, and this isn't a definite chart. This is just more an idea of what could be introduced. So what we're looking at is the voting power in blue, and then we're looking at the minimum commission in orange. And it's so important to note that this wouldn't, you're not introducing a voting power cap, minimum commission cap. You're introducing a dynamic system which can actually bring it all to a fair level. Nobody will be an advantage over anybody. It would all become a system which would decentralize itself, and we need this right now, don't we, Strafe? I think, like you're saying, it's really important on your list. It's really important on my list. We both have the ability to assist the L1 team in doing this. Not like we're asking them to go out half-heartedly and dive straight into this alone, right? We've got their backs on this.
Yeah, I mean, although not being a level one developer, I think people that are non-developers or people that are developers in a different field can always take part in discussions, because different viewpoints out of the current out of the own ecosystem can really bring some new point of view sometimes. And just what I wanted to add to it, this system wouldn't be something that doesn't allow validators to raise the commission. So if, for example, someone would want 20% commission while having only 1% voting power, that would not be an issue. It's just about the minimum commission that would have to be applied to a validator.
Exactly. So if you still want to capitalize in at 20% commission on your validator node, which a lot of people do, then you can do that. It's not what we're trying to do, aren't we, Strafe, is introduce systems which are not forceful. They're not shoved down your throat. They're not aggressive. They come in a very diplomatic, a very calm manner, and they're just here to try and improve the system overall and make things easier for everybody. I think everybody would be safe to say right now they would be happy to see a decentralized set. It's beyond reckoning at this point. So, number 6. Let's move on to number 6, which is really important. And on ramps, you can never have enough on ramps, right, Strath?
Yeah, I think people need to have the choice. If we look at other wallet solutions, there are some that offer, I think, at least 2, 3, 4 options where you can buy the coins. So, although currently I know the teams are already implementing or looking for solutions, I think that's something that we always hear about, that the chain needs on ramp, and also further down the line some kind of off ramp, because those two things are the only ones that to some extent make people independent from CE access.
Definitely. Talking on off ramps, commodity pools is such a useful tool in these situations because we can provide the liquidity ourselves. Now, somewhere to actually source a vast amount of liquidity, for example, to generate that with USTC would be to patch the leaks of the USTC coming out of the Oracle rewards pool so it doesn't affect the USTC quant team's repeg. And then you could effectively put that into commodity pools, create a barrier so no one can, overbuy, oversell, etc. And actually utilize that for good. Open up those pools when the prices are looking good, and close those pools down when the prices aren't looking so good. We've got a lot of options when it comes to on ramps and off ramps, and honestly, I know this from experience that a lot of the time it's not actually building the things that is complicated. It's actually linking up with these companies to provide the on ramps, or finding the liquidity to put in these different commodity pools to kickstart these off ramps.
Yeah, you always, even when it comes to on ramps, it depends on the company, but they need some kind of liquidity, or they need to partner themselves with CE Access or other companies, because in fact, if someone wants to buy, they have to provide the LUNC or USTC or whatever that is requested. And I think each company has a different approach on that. But yeah, it all comes down to getting the coins from somewhere. And yeah, so
You're saying that. You're saying that as if we have a very, very small supply. I don't know where we go. Has anyone seen any of those LUNC coins?
Lunch coins.
Yeah. You guys got any of those LUNC coins lying around at all?
Greetings from autocorrection.
Hunk coins, did you say? No, LUNC coins. Lunch. Oh, but we've looked into options, haven't we, Strafe? And I've actually looked at further options myself, which are, we can get systems up and running through Paybolt, which also actually serves our systems already. We can go through Trust Wallet, Kado, Binance even provide these on-ramps. They were for Luna at one point. For all intents and purposes, right, Strafe, we could provide an on-ramp button that are just simply links to CEXs, right?
Yes,
for now. For now.
I think there are already partly or fully implemented something. I don't know.
Before Kado replaced the system that Luna are using before Kado, that system was literally just a button and then a link to Binance came up. And I thought that was great, right? Because you could literally just implement that, a chimp. I mean, if you gave a chimp Elon Musk's Neuralink and a keyboard not plugged in, he could probably do it. It's not real complex. But yeah, these on-ramps, it's stuff to get excited about.
Yes, it's the difficulty in it is to get the right on-ramp for everybody, because as you know, Binance is not available anymore in Netherlands. It's not available in some countries. Other on-ramps or CXs would probably serve in that countries, but not be available in Europe or whatever. So choosing on-ramps that support a majority or having multiple on-ramps that altogether support the most people that might want to get involved, that is probably the challenge, to find it, to research, and to, as you said, to get in touch with those companies.
How would you get in touch with a company and make things much easier for them as a company, right, to see you and know you are someone who works for the chain, you're paid by the chain, and you're all secure? How would you do that, Strath? Could you do that for a KYC module? No, I don't. No.
Yeah, I'm seeing what you're doing here.
But it all sort of starts to tie into itself. And how long have on-ramps been promised for by how many people? I mean, Rex, so many people have, I'm going to bring on-ramps. They never turn up. This is not us saying to you, we're going to do this and we're going to be able to see all of this out. It's all subject to governance, but we're going to give it our darn best shot. With these KYC systems, if I could KYC to get myself more recognized by someone like Kado as an official affiliate, for example, right, of the blockchain, I would do that. Because that's always the struggle, right, Strath, is getting in connection with these people. For example, Vegas has a direct link to Binance, but he's never handed it to anybody. He keeps it to himself. It's...
Yeah, I don't really know who really has the connections to what entities, because that's far away from what I am working at. So I leave that to those people. Yeah,
exactly.
To that things.
Well, the fishwives in the evening telling their little fireside fish stories. Right, so let's move on to number 7. I think this one is a good idea. The reason why I think this is a good idea is validators always vote, but a lot of them don't have YouTube channels. They don't have Twitter accounts. It'd be quite easy for them to simply give a reason for why they voted when they vote. And that's why we believe introducing a reason for vote memo mechanism, which we've looked into, haven't we, Strath? And we've seen that we can simply just take the memo system that's already there and just apply it to validator votes. It's quite simple, really, but we would just need a pull request put through and TFL to merge it, right?
Yes, the reason why that is quite simple is that a memo exists for every transaction on the chain, and you could so introduce an input, a text field that is limited to a certain amount of characters on the voting page in Station. And so if you vote, you can voluntarily put either a URL or a reason in short in this field, and it is stored on chain with the transaction, with the vote transaction. So whoever wants to give a reason or link to a more extensive statement could put it in there. And in a further step, which in fact would require a bit more work, like for example extending the FCD endpoints, would be to fetch this memo from the chain. So other pages like Moonrunners or formerly LUNC Dash or
Or the station system
Taken
itself.
or the station system itself could display the voting reason.
And then you have a historic account on the chain of what validators have voted and how they voted. And I think, you know, if we look at our plan that we've brought forward to you, this vision, this united vision forward to you, you've noticed that there's a few things we want to integrate into Station, and this is another one of them. And I believe, again, this brings another layer of security to our chain. You know, it brings a level of, because what, I don't know if you know this, Strath, but if you go and look at rejected proposals on any of the platforms, it just shows a load of spam proposals. It doesn't actually fetch the correct rejected proposals. So we actually lose those each time. So if something's rejected, it just gets lost to time. We would immortalize things. And, you know, once again, Googling the absolute, you know, goddamn grandma out of Station.
You can some pages managed to actually display the failed proposals in the order of when they failed, or when they were put up for voting in descending order. That that makes it a bit easier to check back. But when you look at Station itself, then it's quite difficult because you really only see those spam things, and you, once a proposal has been rejected, you have a hard time finding it in Station.
I know the metrics used to be off slightly with the OG dashboard, but you know, it's not in this list. But that's something that I would love to see make a comeback, is official metrics on the dashboard again. Is these really, you know, it puts our blockchain to shame, really. We pay, you know, $100,000 out. No, what I think is $120,000 out a quarter. And we don't even have all of these simple things we're speaking about here in this podcast with you all. It really does put us to shame when a website like Moonrunners, or for example, you know, Strafe, we're the OGs of these metric sites. You know, it's a LUNC Dash. For those who know it as LUNC Dash, it was just LUNC Penguins. It was just, it was nothing. It was just a chart, right?
Yes, in the beginning it was just something, because after the crash, in fact, nothing worked. Nothing worked anymore. We didn't have anything where we could look at, and it was a simple solution at that time, and it had its time. So I am not really feeling bad about that. It's not really that needed anymore. That there are better looking places now you can go to and find not all of those information, but quite a lot of those. And I think that's a good development for the chain also, because yeah, having those places where people can look for all the information and having them in a really good looking and well organized way, that's really important.
Many will probably agree and are probably feeling the same way I did. I loved LUNC Dash. I love the style. I love the simplicity of it. I loved how you could grab what
But really,
information you needed very easily. It was, but there are real pretty other
Jay,
options.
do you know what just came to me? It's just really a thought into the blue. We contact Moonrunners and say, here, could you please make a reduced version, just a dashboard with some of those information you really beautifully put up, and try to make a pull request on station so we have some of those information directly available.
Exactly. I think that's a brilliant idea. I honestly believe in utilizing what you've got around you, obviously to a certain extent, which we're not going on to any of that in this podcast, but utilizing stuff like that and looking to what's around us is it's always quite important. And that's why looking at this KYC thing, and it gives you a real idea, having the history of the memos and immortalizing everything, it all becomes a lot better, a lot. I'd be very excited to see, having a dashboard back, having all of these real good things we're speaking about all in place, and seeing how the system reacts, seeing how people come back, because we know projects are going to be able to whitelist after the next update. They'll be able to avoid the burn tax, which makes it real good for a project that wants to come and build, folks. For example, being a validator, when you withdraw, by the time you get to a CEX to pay your running costs, you've already been taxed 3 times. You've been hit by the burn tax 3 times. And yeah, but that's getting on to number 8, Strafe, which I'm going to hand it to you, because this one's quite complex and it's going to require a lot of, not a lot of work. Well, a lot of work. Everything's a lot of work. But
It requires feasibility and doability studies
yes,
somehow, because it's just an idea that has not been really checked.
we've cultivated it as far as we can get it.
Yes, but yeah, it might still be that it's really not doable on the level one. On the level one, depending on if we want to get the same results that we have currently. But let me just explain what it is about. So, when the tax was introduced back in 22, the team, they publicly stated that they didn't know much about how the system worked, and they found a way of, yeah, I would say, kind of abusing an existing stability tax that TFL introduced for UST, and that was only used for UST, that didn't apply to LUNC. So they used this implementation and adjusted it so it applied to LUNC also. But the side effect of this is that it has to be calculated separately. So for me, that is one of the main problems when you want to port, for example, a DApp from Luna to LUNC, or maybe even from other chains. While I didn't look into um, the other Cosmos chains that much that I could say they are nearly the same. But for Luna and LUNC, in terms of what contract system we are using, we are quite close. And when someone wants to come over from Luna to LUNC, they still have to adopt the tax calculations and take that into account when they develop the contracts. And so the idea now is to get rid of this calculation. That doesn't mean to get rid of the tax. It just means we currently have 2 fees on chain. We have the gas fee that is dependent on what amount of calculation, in fact, the chain has to do when dealing with the transaction. So contracts mostly pay a lot higher gas fee than simple money sending transactions, or voting transactions also are quite cheap in gas. And this gas is depending on how much load is on the chain. So if there's high volume, high load on the chain, then the gas fee gets higher. And when there's nothing on the chain, then it's quite low. So that is one reason why you cannot simply say we scratch the tax and raise the gas by 10 times, because that would mean you punish the contracts and don't really punish those that are doing simple send transactions.
Every time you make an adjustment to this, it messes up a very delicate ecosystem. When the system changes, projects have to alter their contracts and make changes to a company for all of that. It really messes stuff up when we keep chopping and changing, right? The idea behind this is to not have a gas fee, not have a tax fee, not have a whatever fee, but just have one simple dynamic fee that works on traffic. Low traffic, low fees. High traffic, high fees.
Yeah, kind of, because the idea is to take this tax that we currently have and do a calculation to convert it to gas. That means that the chain not only calculates the amount of work it has to do, but also how much coins are involved in the transaction. And from those two things, it calculates the gas. And that would mean we have a dynamic combination of tax and normal gas fees that is all included in the gas. And because the gas is on all Cosmos chains and it is returned by the simulation endpoint that is called when you, for example, on station type in the amounts that you want to send, the simulation is done in the background on chain that checks how much gas is necessary. And that would get rid of this extra calculation that has to be done in either contracts or DApps to calculate how much tax is involved, in fact, with the amount of coins you want to send around. And so the idea simply was to convert what is currently a tax to get added to the gas. So the issue with that might be the distribution, because the gas is distributed in a completely different way than the tax in terms of Oracle pool, community pool, burn wallet. So that is something that would need to be figured out, and also how this could be hooked into the system without messing things up. But I think this would be a good solution to get rid of this hurdle for teams that have built already on other chains to join this chain, because they wouldn't have to make that much adjustments.
Yeah, this is actually a really important point of the chain, and it's almost important as the decentralization we need of the validating set, because it's like a hurdle that every time we jump it, every time we make a change, the hurdle just gets moved further along, and at some point, someone's going to argue when the chain starts seeing high loads of traffic, hey, we should move the burn tax up to 1.2%, and every time we do this, right, Strafe, what do the media do? The burn tax has gone up to 1.2%. Bam, 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 bam. That's all anybody talks about when we make changes to the burn tax. They've lowered the burn tax. They've raised the burn tax. They've done this with the burn tax. This introduces a system that just wipes it all out.
Keep also in mind that the official statement, I think it was Fireblocks, was that there is a very often changing fee structure. And that is something that also could be maybe mitigated with that, because you wouldn't have to adjust the tax in a way that makes any adjustments necessary on third-party systems that, for example, might not fetch the actual tax amount from the chain each time, but have it implemented somewhere in their systems. It depends on how things are implemented on third-party entities, be in terms of how difficult it is for them to adopt to tax changes. But when you have a contract on chain that uses the chain to query for the current tax amount, then you don't have to make adjustments anymore when the tax is changed. But when you have a system that has fixed amounts for each transaction stored then it becomes more difficult, and you have to handle each time you have to handle LUNC differently than to what you handle other Cosmos chains, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, from what we looked at, there needs to be a threshold which is coded in that it can move between those thresholds, but not above or below them, so to speak. I think that's a way for these exchanges and CEXs to get over it. But they've introduced, a lot of them have introduced the burn tax, kind of, but withdrawals and deposits, right? They're subject to our chain regardless of them updating their systems, right?
Yeah.
So we still, introducing a system like this doesn't mean that CEXs aren't going to be affected, because they are. They're going to be affected more or less on the same scale they currently are. I think there's
Yes.
only Binance that burns.
Yeah, and Binance wouldn't be affected at all
Exactly.
if the whitelist isn't removed, because they are, yeah, whitelisted in a way of internal transactions, and the contract whitelist that will be introduced with the next update also would have to be taken into account when implementing such a thing. So um, nothing would change for that part. But I think, yeah, we need to somehow make it easier for projects that have already built on other chains just to port everything over they have without making that much adjustments in the contracts themselves.
Yeah, definitely. Because if we go on to stuff like official documents, right, there's always the thing at the top is how to move from Terra Classic to Luna, which is horrible for obviously us to see as project creators, project builders. Seeing that stuff, it's annoying. We want to see guides that show people how to migrate to our chain, and is not saying on our own documents that are on our own links that say, hey, move to this better chain, so to speak. So yeah, there's a lot in this, and I think something to actually note before we go any further with this is we've stood back for a year and 3 months, right? We've sort of just sat at the back of the bus. Other people have driven, other people are getting paid to do all these different things, but it's been a year and 4 months, and we've just not seen anything really substantial get done, get dusted, get fixed, and not have to go back to it. We don't have any of these self-serving systems, which is kind of like what the dynamic burn system would be. But we have a duty to this blockchain as project creators, as validators, to ensure that we're doing as much as we can, and we're not just sitting on the sidelines anymore. We've sat there and we've waited, haven't we, Strath, for things to sort of work themselves out. But we're in a dire time right now, and we're both mature enough to see what's happening, right?
It's really a difficult time for the chain, because we are in kind of a situation where we need funding for getting some self-sustaining systems that are owned by the chain, that generate revenue for the chain. But as the price goes down, we have less funding, and as we have less funding, we have less work available to develop something like that. So that's a difficult situation, in fact. And while I myself also, yeah, the validator is brought up recently only, and so I quite kept out of governance most of the time. But when we, so Jay and I discussed recently quite a bit, and also argued quite a bit about different things. Yeah, there was, at some point it was clear that we, if we want to contribute to the discussion, we need to first discuss between us something that we both can agree on that would be a viable way forward. Because something that I think is, I'm always trying to be very diplomatic and not intrusive. And it's it's kind of not really beneficial. It has not been really beneficial when one team came up with a proposal, because when it was done this way, we faced a lot of objection from other parties. And so it might be really a way to try to first get different people from different views together to work something out that can work in both of their views. And so you have something that has been discussed already from different viewpoints and not been brought up only from a single viewpoint. And I think that is something that we try to achieve with this list of ideas to bring forward.
So something we always do between us, we find, we argue things out, we debate things out, we talk things out, but most importantly, we meet in the middle. It's never one-sided. It's never, I've got to, meet him because he's doing this, or it's always very, very diplomatic. And as much as I don't want to say this, especially not in this podcast, if we are to do all of these meet in the middle things, other people in the sector who have placed themselves by privatizing sectors need to begin to meet this chain in the middle, and specifically meet everybody in the middle. Because if we are all to meet in the middle, we all need to be giving back to this blockchain. Currently, the majority of people take. There's no project on the blockchain that cycles liquidity realistically like LUNCpenguinsNFT, projects like Miata, projects like Metagloria, for example. All of those sort of ones, they cycle, LUNC, and the blockchain needs cheaper running costs, and anybody trying to keep it in a position where they're privatizing and profiting off of keeping the chain in a position, it's got to stop. These people have got to wake up and realize that it's just going to collapse. It will collapse because we're all taking from it, and it's a tree that's dying, it's withering. And if we begin to give back to it, we begin to get these systems in place where there aren't any changes, we aren't going to see Fireblocks, yes, making an official statement saying there's too many changes, there's a high risk of funds being lost. That high risk of funds being lost can only be realistically, if you were to give it context, there's only one place it goes into context currently, and that's with a recent proposal to just delete coins. Discussions to delete coins. It's all very serious when someone like Fireblocks, and I've spoken about this, but I think you'll understand it best, Strafe, being a developer and doing what you do in your real life stuff. It's, they're big business. If we lose their support, it's huge. It's starting from scratch. It's getting listings again and gaining trust. We can regulate now before it's too late.
Yes, I have to be honest that I am not really that deep into that stuff about CEX listings and Fireblocks. That's far from what my core competence is. But something I think that needs to be highlighted again is that we have a very difficult and very different situation to what TFL was in. And that's something I totally understand entities that are trying to make a business from LUNC. And I am naming Hexagon here, not because I want to fund what they are doing. That is totally, they are doing business. What the problem currently is, when we compare Hexagon with their work, what they are certainly doing with TFL, then that means TFL, as I said prior, provided their own infrastructure to keep their system that funded themselves running. So compared to that, every infrastructure provider, be it Hexagon, be it Allnodes, it doesn't matter. It doesn't fund the chain because it is a business that needs liquidity from the chain. But the chain in our situation is not a company It is something that has no funding source. And that is why we need somehow to find something, some use cases that people can utilize that are chain owned, that are really chain owned. I mean, for example, even with me, even with Mayetta, even with LUNCpenguins, those are projects that contribute, but those are not chain owned. Everything I do currently is not chain owned. It contributes to volume. It contributes maybe to use case that so that people can utilize their LUNC, but it doesn't fund the chain directly in terms that all fees besides transaction fees, that those I don't think about. I mean systems that really bring liquidity to the chain itself, and that is something we need that badly, and that I think it needs to get more thoughts, because I didn't recently, maybe I missed it, but I recently didn't see any bigger discussion about what could be implemented on chain that is chain owned and generates value for the chain itself. I see
Yeah.
many discussions about projects that might be launching, and I appreciate every project launching, even if it's competitive or whatever. That it doesn't matter. It contributes to the volume. It produces use cases, and as long as it's no scam or rug, it's yeah, it's beneficial. But short term, mid-term, long term, we need chain owned, chain funding systems.
Boom. You've heard it from somebody else's mouth, so to speak, the horse's mouth direct, so to speak. And Strath's not somebody who takes sides, right? He's not somebody that, you know, will support somebody's idea over somebody else's just because he's friends with them or, you know, he's known them for a long time. He supports what he believes in and what's logical to his brain. You know, there's one thing I've always said about you, Strafe. When you talk, you shut up and you just listen. You listen to what he's got to say. Now, I'm looking at the Confio halt, funding halt, which is actually a proposal over on Luna. Had a lot of votes on it. Almost the whole validating base have voted on it. Now, there's some key things in here which really back up what you've just spoken about, and it's them determining as a community that neither the core development team at TFL nor any significant builders within the Terra Terra ecosystem require specific assistance from Confio on CosmWasm or other code-related issues. Furthermore, Confio has not sufficiently acknowledged Terra funding's contributions to date, with Terra's current priorities leaning towards ecosystem growth and development. The allocation of public goods funding can be more justified once the ecosystem is stronger. This proposal embodies the Terra community's intent to evaluate the effectiveness and appropriateness of past funding proposals and aims to enhance governance over future community pool funding. Now, this has got real strong votes, yes, and the rest of the community more or less just abstained from it. 10% voting no. So a real strong pass. Seeing people like All Nodes voting. This only passed, you know, around a week ago, if that. You know, that speaks mountains, just what is in that proposal written by Orbital Command, part of the Luna community. It's, you know, it's them seeing that, hey, you know, we've got leaks. Hey, we need to patch them, or hey, we're going to be, you know, hemorrhaging money and not going anywhere. And it's, you know, everybody's always not built for the chain. They've not backfed things into the system. It's always, you know, how can we develop our own systems off chain where we can get users to come to there? Can we create a coin? What can we do? It's one of those ones. It's all very interesting, Strath. So I think the final point on this to go through isn't a point, folks. It's more or less just a final note. So it's important to emphasize that this document is not an official proposal, rather it outlines a vision and highlights key development milestones that are, in our opinion, achievable within the specified time frame. Provided there's commitment and proactive involvement, each idea, as outlined, requires individual proposals, which would then be subject to rigorous governance review before ratification. This vision serves as a preliminary blueprint and an invitation for discussion, feedback, and collective refinement. This vision paper is deliberately focused on presenting a high-level development milestones. Consequently, it does not address the obligatory aspects of the Level 1 L1 work, such as routine updates, mandatory security patches, feature implementations that will receive governance approval. The necessity and urgency of these tasks are self-evident and considered fundamental imperatives. Sorry, I've got to scroll down. Inherently accompany the evolution of the blockchain and do not require special mention. The primary intent here is to highlight initiatives that could reshape and advance the Terra Classic landscape, while implicitly ensuring the foundational tasks remain uninterrupted and consistently addressed. Did I get it all?
Quite lengthy one.
Yeah. I don't know why when you're reading something, it's like you're running out of breath as you get to the end. But, you just talk normally. It's a strange one. But folks, we've been in this for a while. Me and Strath, we believe that these are really important points. And, this podcast will be going up midday today. You'll probably be listening to it, getting towards the end about 2 p.m. This will be up on the Commonwealth's community section. Okay, we're going to need to do is go to the Commonwealth and click the community section, and this will be there for you to comment on, go nuts at, scrutinize, shout at, and whatever. But we'll be moving forward with things in due course, and we'll be giving more information out. But I think it's safe to say, Strafe, we're more or less a VTF at this point. We're just a volunteer task force. That's it. We're not ever looking for anything from any of this or anything we ever do in the future. We don't work like that. That's why we gave the auto compound module out for free.
I think it doesn't need to be funded work, because it's I don't know how to say, because we need funded work. That is obvious, because there's things that need to be done by specialists or by people with the respective knowledge. But there are things that need to be done voluntarily, like presenting ideas, like helping out, be it projects or whatever. And I just want to repeat again, it's totally valid and it's totally understandable when people want to make business on and with LUNC. That is something that is necessary. It's just that we are in a phase that we really have an issue with the amount that we can use to fund things, and that we are in a cycle that when we fund things, we don't have anything left to fund chain beneficial things that constantly bring in further funding for the long term.
Yeah, it's important that we begin to get more aligned as a community, and we can't keep relying on these big nodes to keep, it's horrible for us to keep pestering them. It must feel horrible for them too. I'm sure they would invite, systems that we've spoken about, that we've mentioned and brought forward. So something to take note of, there's a lot of things for you guys to take note of during this podcast. People sat there with their books like, hang on, mate, I've only got through the 100th note. Hang on. But these aren't, the proposals that will be going forward and being put forward. These aren't them. Okay. This is just a brief summary of what we're putting forward. If people are like, oh, you're going to have to pay for KYC bloody hamsters to run on wheels and you haven't accounted in for their food and stuff like that. We know. Okay. It's shorthand. We try to get it as simple as we can whilst also keeping as much information in there as possible. But we wanted it to be a digestible document and something the community, because it's so important, isn't it, Strafe, that the community actually see goals being achieved, right? They're then going to go off and tell their friends, hey, things are going really good. People on other blockchain, they'll see the news, things are going really good. And it's all starts with sentiment, the sentiment, and then people starting to, and this position we're in, like Strath was saying, it's okay to profit from the blockchain. That's the whole idea behind it. And, building systems like, it's horrible to say this, but LUNC Penguins that stakes its treasury and utilizes the commission to generate rewards. It's a self-serving system at that point. And, we need to get to a point where everything's as self-serving as it can be. Everything's as cheap as it can be, and everything's running as smoothly as it can be. But
the optimum solution is at whatever point in the future, the chain generates enough fund from its own services that it can fund two distinct infrastructures that are distributed and also located as fallback on central entities. So if for whatever reason one central entry point goes out of service, there's a backup one. And that point where the chain generates from its own services that it offers, that it generates enough funding and also generates enough funding to pay for the development. That would be a solution that would make us really happy, I think. But
definitely getting to a point where we could, generate pools to stake off chain, utilize an IBC, utilize the technology, and stake on Atom, stake on Juno. There's a whole cosmos. And I hope, folks, that listening to this podcast, you're going to share this. You're going to show this to different people. I think, Strafe, what we should do is we'll do a live public Twitter space or something. Once this goes up and Strafe and I have got some time, we'll arrange a Twitter space, and we won't have any speakers up. We'll go through the whole thing, and then we'll have speakers up at the end. We'll take notes, and we hope to see all of you commenting on this and giving your input. Just go easy on us, all right? We are volunteers.
Blame us, fight us.
Yeah, exactly.
Bring us down.
We're here, but that's all we've got for you for now, folks. This has been a really long podcast, probably one of the longer ones, coming on to around 2 hours. But that's all we've got for you. Anything closing there, Strafe, you want to say to the community?
Not really. Going to bed now.
Folks, thank you so much for signing up. Stay safe, stay humble, stay aware. Pay attention to the disclaimers at the beginning, because I'm not going to be repeating all of that nonsense anymore. And I'll catch you in the next one.